a new world is not proclaimed by beat of drum.
We are studying Sri Aurobindo's description of concentration and samadhi in the context of the yoga of integral knowledge. As a brief recapitulation, in the previous chapter, the theme was purifying the mind to prepare it for an ascent and a liberation from its limitations, so that the mind could enter in direct concentration on the divine to attain to an experience and an identity with the divine consciousness. And from this, the chapter on concentration views concentration as the complementary aspect of the purification of the mind, the two together leading to that realization. But in the way concentration is used traditionally, it involves a removal of all things which distract the mind from its one-pointed focus. And the samadhi that is so attained is a samadhi in which one is entirely withdrawn from everything which is a distraction from the one divine, and that means all experiences of the senses, the outer senses, the inner senses, and eventually a complete withdrawal from all action of nature and an immersion into that which is beyond description. But in the aim of the integral yoga, Sri Aurobindo discusses how our concept of the goal is different, and it is not as exclusive as the traditional approach. It includes equally the aspect of the divine manifestation, not just the divine in its transcendence. And so, if we are to realize the divine both in his transcendence and in his manifestation, then our approach of concentration and our understanding of samadhi also must be different, with a richer and a more profound meaning. And then he discusses how all our concentration is only a reflection of the divine concentration, the divine tapas, by which the one self dwells on himself, dwelling in his ananda with the concentration of his knowledge and will and the force of his concentration of consciousness on himself and his manifestation. And so all experience of concentration in our human mental life is as if a fragment, a part of this larger divine concentration on himself. But the difference is that the divine concentration on himself is an inclusive concentration. What we experience is an exclusive concentration. For the divine concentration, all of himself dwells on himself, which is all. And so he himself is dwelling on all of himself with his totality. And although that moves into multiplicity of manifestation, it is still a single movement, a single concentration. But for us, because we are already dwelling in an individualized consciousness, separate, cut off from the all, our sense of concentration is narrower. And we use concentration as a means for this individual, separate person to enter in contact with a higher state of consciousness or an experience or on the oneness of the divine. So it's a way by which we exit the narrowness and attain to that oneness which is natural for the divine tapas, the divine concentration. And the concentration itself, he says, proceeds by the idea, using thought, form, and name as keys. But all of these keys, as we have seen, are only entry points to hold attention of the mind. Eventually, through the key, we have to get to the thing itself, of which the key is a representation. When thus we enter into a higher, freer consciousness, there is a self-gathered state of the whole being which is lifted up into that consciousness, and that immersion in an infinity of self-aware and self-blissful existence will be for us the definition of samadhi. And Sri Aurobindo then points out that this experience of samadhi is not an experience necessarily withdrawn from the world. It is an experience one can have while being in the world with the full sensory awareness of the world. It is an experience that can sustain when we withdraw from the world into the inner domains. It is an experience also which remains when we withdraw into the most essential principle of things. It is a state which is of oneness with the divine, irrespective of where our attention is turned. And once we attain to that, we can experience all things without loss of that state. This was where we had paused, and Sri Aurobindo now discusses what happens when we enter such a state and the place of concentration, and in what way this is different from the conventional focus of concentration and samadhi, especially in the context of the integral yoga. We had read the text briefly last time, but now we take it up with a greater detail for study. He says, when we arrive at this state, all our being and consciousness being concentrated, the necessity of concentration in the idea ceases. So at first when we began with concentration, it was a part of the mind concentrating on an idea or an image, using that as an entry for something. But when we attain to the thing itself, and when our whole being is suffused with that, then this very narrow focus of the mind is no more required. For there, in that supramental state, the whole position of things is reversed. The mind is a thing that dwells in diffusion, in succession. It can only concentrate on one thing at a time, and when not concentrated, runs from one thing to another very much at random. Therefore, it has to concentrate on a single idea, a single subject of meditation, a single object of contemplation, a single object of will in order to possess or master it. And this it must do at least the temporary exclusion of all others. But that which is beyond the mind and into which we seek to rise is superior to the running process of the thought, superior to the division of ideas. The divine is centered in itself, and when it throws out ideas and activities, does not divide itself or imprison itself in them, but holds them and their movement in its infinity. Undivided, its whole self is behind each idea and each movement, and at the same time behind all of them together. So this is the two different approaches of the mind and that which is above mind. So the mind, because it is already a piece, a fragment cut out, and because the nature of the mind is to catch one piece at a time, finites, therefore it can only focus on one thing. And one thing in succession, in a series, one after another. So if the mind has to describe a photograph of a sunrise, the description will pick on one piece at a time. There is a sun, there is the ocean, there are clouds in the sky, there is a tree in the foreground, and then having picked in sequence of whatever priority, it must then put them in right relation. The tree is in front, the waters are behind, the sun is rising on the horizon, there is a boat, there is a bird above. You place them in context with each other. And the listening mind similarly constructs an image, first placing one piece. Suppose someone had to draw the picture as you describe it. He would draw the sun, he would draw the waters. And then you say, but there's a tree in front. So you have to again erase part of what you drew and draw the tree. And he said, oh, I forgot to mention the tree is curving to the right. So again, I have to erase and redraw. And in this way, the mind constructs an image because it can only handle a piece at a time and in sequence. The moment you withdraw that concentration, then it starts jumping at random. If you stand before the scenery and you're not required to describe it to somebody with whom you are speaking on the telephone, they ask you, what does it look like? Well, they say, all right, you just enjoy the scenery. Where does your mind go? It wanders, just like that. You look up, you look down, you look left, you look right. Something catches your attention, then another. So this is the wandering state of the mind. Then the person says, all right, you've enjoyed it enough. Now tell me what you watch. And now we're forced to follow the sequence in concentration. So at a time, it can only hold one piece. And through that piece, it can go to something else or something deeper. But that which is beyond the mind, into which we seek to rise, it works differently. Superior to the running process of the thought and superior to the division of ideas. So the consciousness does not see things in pieces. It sees the chunk. It does not see a process for understanding. It knows in identity. It is what it sees. So we experience this, although we do not dwell in this part of the experience consciously, and it is perceived in our studies of the human mind as a function of the right brain. I'll just describe a very interesting experiment where people who had epileptic fits, at first the scientists were experimenting, thinking that everything can be reduced to the brain. So they were experimenting with how to modify the brain to cure the epilepsy. And one thing they found was by splitting the left and right halves of the brain, by disconnecting the thing in between, the fits would reduce. But then the person would behave a little strange. So, for example, the right eye connects to the left brain and the left eye to the right brain. Of course, this is not explained. Science does not say why it should be thus. There is a spiritual basis for this division also, but we need not go into that now. So, the person now has two different halves of the brain which are no more coordinating with each other. And so the sight of the left eye and right eye is also different. Such a person, when asked to see with his right eye the same sunset, and then he's asked, what do you see? The person will say, I see the sun, I see the water, I see the tree, etc. Now the same person is asked to see it with the left eye. Remember, that goes to right brain. What do you see? And he will say, oh, it's so beautiful. But what do you see? I can't say. It is beautiful. Can you describe what you see? It is beautiful. He is unable to reduce it to pieces. He is holding an experience of that beauty, of being overwhelmed, of enjoying, but he is not able to cut it up into pieces. And Sri Aurobindo refers to this faculty, the right-hand faculty of the mind. He does not say right brain. Right-hand faculty of the mind which is synthetic. And he calls it the master of knowledge. It is this part of the mind's functioning which is opening to the oneness. And it is from here that the connection to the intuition takes place. Because intuition knows in this way in identity with the whole. The left hand faculty of the mind is that which is analytic instead of synthetic. It cuts up and joins. Whereas the synthetic faculty not only joins, it holds the unity in one go. So when we read a sentence, the part of the mind which analyzes the words and their relationships and the grammar, whether it refers to this word or that word in a long sentence, that is the left brain. But the right brain sees the meaning of the whole. Now it is possible to read on two different levels. I'm dwelling on this only to highlight that we actually have this faculty somewhere in us. It is just untapped. It is possible to read on two levels, especially when we are reading in a language which is not familiar to us. You will see the person reading one word at a time and then going back to put it all together to try to get the sense of the meaning. Or when we read a very long sentence of Sri Aurobindo and we are not in sync, we are not in tune, we read, what does that mean? And we go back and we try to put together pieces. But there's another state in which you do not read the words anymore. Your eyes skim the words, but your mind is as if floating above the words themselves. And the meaning just flows in. And at that point, it's obvious. You even have a sense of experiencing the thing which you are reading. And this is where this higher faculty is operating. When we train to read fast, we are taught not to focus on individual words, but to catch chunks of words in one go. And this forces the mind to operate at a higher level of functioning. You will also have noticed, perhaps you have seen this on email, there's a study that shows that when you look at a word, you do not need to read all the letters. If the first and last letters are correct, and all the letters in between, even if they are mixed up, you will recognize the word. So you can read a full sentence like this with words with their letters mixed up, and you'll find no difficulty at all. And this is where you recognize that your brain, your mind's function is actually not focusing on letters. It's catching chunks of letters, groups into one word at a time. But at a higher level, it catches groups of words. At a still higher level, it can even catch groups of phrases, of sentences, or an entire paragraph in one go. Such was the power of Swami Vivekananda. When he was reading, he would go so fast. People would say, how do you read so fast? He said, you people read one word at a time. I read one paragraph at a time. And it's possible to train this. It is not so difficult. But what happens when you train it is that a part of your mind is automatically forced to rise above and to catch things, grasp them at a level which is more comprehensive. And it brings it closer to this status where he says, that which is beyond the mind and to which we seek to rise is superior to the running process of the thought, superior to the division of ideas. And what I'm saying here is something of this already exists in us. And because it exists, it's possible for us to ascend in continuity into this higher domain. In this higher domain, when we are fully in it, the sense of an underlying oneness is stronger. In its highest, it is the divine centered in itself. When it throws out ideas and activities, it does not divide itself or imprison itself in them. So two things are not happening. If we were to spread out into many things, the human mind, we would end up dividing ourselves. I do this, I do this, I do this. A part of me is handling this, another part here, another part here. And we put ourselves in it. While I'm doing this, I forget everything else. While I'm doing this, I forget everything else because I'm in it. But the divine consciousness, being essentially a consciousness of oneness, as it does many things, it does not split. It is one movement, doing many things. And it does not enter into it to the loss of itself. It is always above and free, even as it pours itself. So this is a bit difficult to perceive, but we can use certain analogies which help us to recognize this more easily. If you take the analogy of a balloon, you have a balloon with little dots, different colors, marks on it. When you look at the balloon, it's one thing with many marks. Now when you start blowing in the balloon and the balloon begins to expand, you will see all those little marks now become large circles, patches of colors. The entire balloon is expanding. Each of those circles is growing. But I, who am blowing in the balloon, am not exclusively attached to any one of these circles. I am blowing the one balloon. The energy, the push of force is single, which pushes all those things equally. Someone sitting on the balloon, an ant which is wandering around, will say, oh, he's pushing on this circle, the white circle is becoming larger. Another ant which is on the green circle will say, oh, he's pushing on the green circle which is becoming larger. Oh, he's fully behind me, he's backing me, the green circle. And the other ant says, no, he's backing me, the white circle. And they quarrel over each other. But the one behind is pushing on all equally. Is he in them? Yes, he is, but not to the point of self-loss. He is in each one equally, and yet he is outside, pushing, supporting in a single movement. Or we may similarly see a stream, a river, when it pours down, flowing down the mountain, and spreads out. It is a single movement, a single energy spreading out, but it may cause many different rivulets to divide, to flow in many different rivulets. But the force behind is still one force. The division of rivulets happens only in a consciousness which can see pieces at a time, which can only see pieces at a time. So the divine is centered in itself, and when it throws out ideas and activities, does not divide itself or imprison itself in them, but holds them and their movement in its infinity. So we may conceive of this balloon now as an infinity. The universe itself is that balloon of an infinite size, manifesting, pouring unendingly infinite possibilities. Each little spot is continuously growing, emerging, new possibilities. Where there was nothing before, in empty space, a new spot appears and a new manifestation begins, and everything is happening at the same time. Each gets the full force of the same one divine consciousness, and all these are getting the full force of the same one. So he says, undivided, its whole self is behind each idea, capital I, and each movement, and at the same time behind all of them together. Held by it, each spontaneously works itself out, not through a separate act of will, but by the general force of consciousness behind it. So this is the same analogy in the balloon. One blowing movement which is pushing all those circles to grow. There's no separate focus on each one of them. If to us there seems to be a concentration of divine will and knowledge in each, it is a multiple and equal and not an exclusive concentration. And the reality of it is rather a free and spontaneous working in a self-gathered unity and infinity. So to us, because we are like the ants on the surface of the balloon, we see each of those pieces, it looks like it is separate, but if at all you accept that it is separate, it is only multiple and equal and not exclusive concentration. So Sri Aurobindo valued greatly the experience of multiple concentration and the poise of equality behind multiple concentration for this reason, because it's that intermediate state from our current training of the mind towards that where you have the full multiplicity of the one divine consciousness. So in his writings on education, you will see similarly that he highlights the need to train the mind to develop the power of multiple concentration. We train the mind to do one thing at a time, fully, exclusively, which is good. But after that, we have to train it to be able to do multiple things. Now, when you start practicing this, you'll notice something interesting happens. Let's say you are playing an instrument. So your fingers are playing the melody, and at the same time, you're asked to sing. Normally, what will happen, one of the activities will become mechanical. The fingers will repeat themselves and your focus will shift to the singing. Or if at that point you're asked to converse and you have to answer questions, your attention will shift out, it becomes more difficult. But if you have to do two different mechanical things, let's say with the fingers you do something, with your feet you play something else, and with your elbow you do something else, with your head you do something else, at that point you'll notice your mind automatically disengages. It programs the fingers to move, then disengages. Programs the feet to move, disengages. Programs the head to move, disengages. And it holds the whole in a kind of unity. It's a very interesting experience. And at that point, you find you're observing, the things are happening mechanically. The moment you sense something is going out of sync, you put a little bit of attention, correct it, and then move back. And it's a status in which you realize you are not doing these things. You stand back, you sanction, you allow, you program, train, and then withdraw. Nature does it, but you are separate. You only hold the unity of it together. You notice the moment your concentration on the whole, the moment it falters, something begins to go out of sync. But when you remain still, equal, the harmony of all these movements is sustained. It's a very interesting training and very yogic in what it leads to. Such a state can be had in the mental consciousness. And it is, in a sense, a kind of reflection of the divine status. It is not the true thing, but it is a reflection still, and it assists in the ascent to that experience. So he uses this word, held by it, by that one movement, held by it, each spontaneously works itself out, not through a separate act of will, but by the general force of consciousness behind it. So this sense of holding, you're holding the whole thing, and in a single concentration, a single force, not separate movements. Something similar is experienced by the conductor of an orchestra. He waves his stick, but he's listening to all the instruments. A skillful conductor will experience all the music happening within his consciousness. Each person, each player is held in his consciousness. Before one of the instruments goes out of sync, he will sense the disharmony in his consciousness and immediately direct his attention to correct. He is as if carrying the whole orchestra in himself, carrying the music as it emerges, and you will see automatically his body begins to express the force of the music. When he wants to bring in more dynamism, more intensity, his body will start making certain movements. And as if with those movements, he's pushing the players, the instruments on the right side to push, intensify, or bring more vitality into what they play. And then he slows down and he relaxes and he pulls them with him. The whole thing is a single consciousness experience in which he guides this whole orchestra in the way that he wants. A similar experience happens also in intense teamwork. Who holds the team together is the natural leader. If there's a hierarchy, well, it is so-and-so who is in charge, everyone obeys. But if there is no obvious leader, somebody who holds the mission and the purpose of the mission is the one carrying the group. You can extend this into any kind of collective activity, and you will feel the truth of this and the way this works. In the military especially, because this is considered so important to be able to function as a single whole, a single team, a single unit of many people, they have many practices which are intended to strengthen this kind of a bond. I remember once I was invited to speak to a group of naval officers, and after the sessions that we had, we were invited to a formal dinner. At the center of the room was the flag officer commanding in chief of the whole Eastern Command. Next to him in a hierarchy were the seniors, and then there were several tables around, like satellites around the main table. On each of these tables, somebody of the Navy was seated facing directly the flag officer commanding in chief, the center. And we were told in the beginning that we don't start doing anything until that person does it. That is, we don't lift the fork, we don't eat the food until he does it. And he does not do it until the commander starts. So the whole arrangement is physically set with a center of power, authority, initiation there. Only when the flag officer commanding in chief lifts up his spoon, all the satellite will lift up their spoon, and then the tables there will lift up their spoon. And so it's as if the whole dinner is initiated by this one person and everybody else is subsumed into his consciousness. It's a very interesting experience to watch, but also one could see how practices such as these are intended to create this kind of a group unity in more informal settings, as in businesses today. You will find people are taken into these training camps where they're thrown out in the wild, they're asked to survive in nature, climb mountains together, and they're each given roles supporting each other. So the team bonding takes place in these extremes where without one, the whole team will collapse. You learn to depend on each other and so on. But you notice in that whole process, there is a kind of a diffusion of your consciousness merging into others, and a kind of a group consciousness forms. After that, we work much better together. If you can become conscious of this group awareness, the person who holds that group awareness can again begin to modulate the group state by changing his own internal state. Now I'm pointing to all these again to show that this, what we are reading, is not so far out. It is happening in a reflected way on so many levels in our life. And when we begin to perceive this, we realize that there is an ascending sequence of states in which we can, as if, use those steps. In our own human consciousness, you will see this happening when You emerge from a state of deep concentration or meditation. You come out, if you do not rush into the life activity and maintain that status, you look at the whole day before you. Let's say it has been a morning meditation. You are in a state of in a higher state or deeper state of consciousness, disengaged from the processes of the world, and now you re-engage. You look at the whole world, the whole day before you, but you remain still in that status above, free, and try to sustain that as you enter the day's activities. Initially, you will tend to get sucked into the activities, so you practice disengaging repeatedly at brief pauses between activities. But eventually, a kind of a double consciousness forms. A part of you remains free while another part enters in identification into the activities. And the moment you disengage from the activity, you realize the other part which was standing above is still there, intact. And you can complete a whole day in this way and come back to rest in that station from which you began the day. And nothing has changed there. When this is done sufficiently easily, you will find the quality of the day is determined by this presiding state of consciousness. Part of you may be involved, may be lost, but this will always pull it back, direct it, guide it, give it the necessary correction when it goes off track, when it gets lost too much in the detail. And this becomes now the presiding consciousness of the whole day. In fact, there is such a presiding status. Its center is above our head for the whole of our being, our whole personality, and the whole journey of our life. It is this which Sri Aurobindo describes as the central being. Sri Aurobindo explains that this is the aspect of the self which presides over your individual journey. Its station, its center is naturally just above the head. And it is from here that it holds together all the different parts of our nature. When it remains simply detached, nature is allowed to follow its normal mechanical activity. But whenever it chooses, it can pull the threads, so to say. And the whole of the personality is drawn together and bound together, tightly integrated. Especially when there is a crisis, when there is a great difficulty, it may seize the situation, draw the whole thing in its control, assert its will, assert itself to correct whatever is needed, and then again release and allow the personality to continue to wander. And you wonder what happened. During that period, suddenly everything was different. I was in a different state. But this is there already doing what is needed. We are not it. We are lost in the personality. When we thus disengage ourselves, establish this station of awareness which can preside over the day, we are closer to that. But a similar step further can bring us in attunement with that, a state of, let's say, attunement with the self. Not yet oneness, but even attunement. You're aware of it. You just have to turn your attention and you feel it. And then we continue to refer to it frequently in the day. Or even a part of us remains attuned to it while the rest of us is involved in the day. And in this situation, already the integrating action, holding the whole personality, the whole journey of life together, becomes greatly amplified and begins to become more and more frequent. And then a point may come when we open ourselves in our whole being and are always turned to that station of the oneness which presides. It begins to lead our life more and more directly. And this brings us closest to what Sri Aurobindo is describing here. The divine is centered in itself, and when it throws out ideas and activities, does not divide itself or imprison itself in them, but holds them and their movement in its infinity. Undivided, its whole self is behind each idea and each movement, and at the same time behind all of them together. Held by it, each spontaneously works itself out not through a separate act of will, but by the general force of consciousness behind it. So this general force of consciousness is how the soul normally guides the journey of our life. The psychic being hidden within, behind the personality, does not always have a direct influence on all the parts of the personality. It uses occasions when we are not so conscious, when we are not so driven, to exercise a subtle suggestion, a subtle influence. We're about to make a decision, and just at the moment when we're about to make the wrong decision, something distracts the mind, and at that point the psychic being pushes a different direction. We come back and, oh, this is what I would like to do, and the correction has been made. We are not even conscious of this, which is secretly nudging, pushing. But it must work around the limitations of the personality. Unless we have begun the culturing of the personality and consciously putting it in tune with the psychic being. When we turn within, when we turn inwards to feel what is that deeper guidance pointing to, what is the deeper sensitivity indicating, then its task becomes that much easier. But in a normal human being who is lost in a normal, ego-driven, formed, rigidly formed personality, it can even find itself struggling and suffocating. And at that point, when it finds itself struggling, it can call for the help from above, from the divine consciousness, whose individual representation is the central being. And then from here comes the push, the nudge. It can take two forms because it is infinite. Although it presides over this personality's journey, because it is infinite, it is one with the whole, it also has its awareness of the all. It can intervene by waking the personality. Suddenly one day I wake up and I wonder, what am I doing here? Why am I wasting my life? This is really a waste of time. I look back and I think, what happened the last 10 years? I did nothing useful. What do I really want to do? And suddenly things change and I wonder why it happened. I woke up as if suddenly. Or it uses a situation, an occasion, a shock, an accident. It could be to myself or it could be to another. I look at what happened to the other person and I transfer it on myself and say, what if it happened to me? And suddenly I start asking those deeper questions. Or where this personality is extremely rigid, it influences circumstances. It can make you trip up, or it may influence circumstances to provoke the crisis that is needed for the awakening of the personality. But the help called for by the psychic being acts in this way, from this larger station of the divine consciousness. And so everything seems to happen as if in synchronicity. I would not be in this mess that I'm in if this and that and that and that had not happened, and if I had not tripped up at that critical moment when I was unconscious, and somehow everything falls into place for the crisis to happen. Or equally the opposite, when we are more in tune with the divine will, there's a crisis situation and we are neatly, smoothly guided out of it. And later when you look back, you say, I could not have got through in this way if not for this and that and that and that and the other happening, and my choosing this when everything was pointing in the other direction. I don't know how it happened. Everything fell into place. And to the human consciousness, because we see things in pieces, it looks like this. If to us there seems to be a concentration of divine will and knowledge in each, from that perspective, it is multiple and equal and not an exclusive concentration. And the reality of it is rather a free and spontaneous working in a self-gathered unity and infinity. So from this station, it said, all right, this is enough. Now we need to get out of it. And the will comes to pull the situation out. And that single will operates on different facets of the circumstances, modifying each just as needed to bring us through. to the other side. We see many different events. From its perspective, it was a single action, a single will. Sri Aurobindo discusses this in a different context when he, in the Record of Yoga, he discusses how the power to influence circumstances develops. Ishita, Vashita, and Aishwarya. In the first case, you will something, you intend something, you desire something, and that goes out very specifically, and a specific outcome comes. That is the power of Ishita. In the case of Vashita, there is a more general action where you intend a specific outcome, but not in the way it will happen. And the intention goes out and forms the things themselves. But the third, which is the highest, Aishwarya, Ishvara, the poise of Ishvara, Lordship, is one where you do not have to bother with specific intentions either. There is a need, and just the fact that the need is felt, things begin to form themselves around, and the outcome takes place. There's a very interesting observation from those who worked with Sri Aurobindo, that he never asked for something. He would never say, I want this. He would never say, do this. He would just look and wait for someone to do it. Now, obviously, this was not a waiting as we would wait. The intention itself would work out through people. And there are suggestive notes in the Record of Yoga where Sri Aurobindo speaks of, makes notes about this. That certain things were required and spontaneously somebody did it, and so on. But it is also the station in which, from which, one can bring about massive shifts, changing the direction of human destiny, which was part of his mission, is something which can only be done from this poise of lordship, Aishwarya. At its highest station, one is one with the one. And from that station, one turns to humanity, and this is seen. The turn, the correction, even the separate sense of awareness of knowledge or will is not there. Simply this is what is chosen. And the action then moves and translates through all the levels in between, unfolding through numerous tiny shifts and corrections in minds of people, in circumstances, in arrangements, in accidents. And things just fall into place and a change takes place. The mother describes this kind of action, which he said Sri Aurobindo was increasingly using in his later years. And she described it as a miraculous intervention of the supramental consciousness. But she said that he did it only in the mental and vital planes, not below in the physical directly, because there are always mixtures there. But she said he would bring a drop of the supramental force on a situation, and poof, everything would fall into place, everything would become harmonious and take the right direction. And she described the characteristics of that action. It would happen on a large scale, the change. It would include a very large scope in its action. Second, it would happen spontaneously. It would seem as if nothing explicitly had been done, and yet things happened. And third, it would be most natural. When it happens, you look back, and although the transition is miraculous, it seems like the most natural thing to have happened. It's not something odd. It's not a miracle which you have to hold on to, which can lapse back. It just happened and it was natural. We can look back at that occasion when the Soviet Union, so to say, disintegrated. And we see barely a couple of months before, it was a complete impossibility. In certain parts, for example, in Romania, as it was found later, 1/3 of the population was an informer for the government. Imagine every third person is an informer for the government, representing government interests. And if you had to plan for a takeover of such a tightly bound institution. You could not have imagined it possible. And yet, when it actually happened, it happened over 1 month, spontaneously things just changed and then suddenly it was done. And you looked back, it was the most natural thing to happen, and yet you couldn't find a single center through which it was initiated. It just happened on a huge scale, and there was no going back. Everything was just right, natural, spontaneous. Examples like this are not so many, but when they do happen, we recognize those characteristics easily. But similar things can happen even on smaller collectivities and situations of life. But this would be the nature of that spontaneous action. He says, and the reality of it is rather a free and spontaneous working in a self-gathered unity and infinity, a one consciousness gathering itself in its freedom, oneness, but that oneness is infinite. It includes the whole universe and beyond, and what it chooses freely is spontaneously worked out. The soul which has risen to the divine samadhi participates in the measure of its attainment in this reversed condition of things, the true condition, for that which is the reverse of our mentality is the truth. So it's a very interesting way of looking at it. The supramental and the mental are literally opposing each other in the way they work. The mental starts with pieces and accumulates to unity. But the unity itself is just a forced unity. It can break any moment, must break eventually because it is never complete. And so it must break to regather in a more complete unity, which is never complete. So it must break again, and so on and on and on. On the other side is the supramental, which begins with unity, turns towards multiplicity, never losing the unity. And it always is complete in its infinity. It always is in its poise of freedom. Whatever action it does is a spontaneous unfolding. It is never a forced exercise of pressure, of energy, pushing against anything. The mother, I think it was Sri Aurobindo who explained, or maybe the mother, that even when the supramental consciousness faces an opposition, it does not experience it as an opposition. Because remember, it is a consciousness of oneness and infinity. So it includes everything, including that thing which comes in opposition. It includes that in its consciousness of unity and sees it merely as a complementary aspect leading to greater completion. So when the supramental consciousness faces opposition, it simply absorbs it and uses it for its own purpose and works itself out more effectively sometimes even because of the opposition. So it seems strange from the mind position because we see things in fragments. But the moment we begin to see things in terms of an inclusive, infinite totality of oneness, there's nothing which is contradictory, nothing which is opposite. There was only a force that came, and that force was used to fulfill further. So when an action comes from this status, there is no experience of opposition. And therefore this consciousness is also the only true consciousness. True in the sense it is self-existent, depending on nothing else for its reality or for its fulfillment. It simply is in its free unfoldment. So the true condition. And the point he makes is this continuity of the ascent. The soul which has risen to the divine samadhi participates in the measure of its attainment in this reversed condition of things. So you have degrees of attainment. This is the reason why I was giving a series of examples from things which we experience to things which are still more difficult to attain, showing that there is actually a kind of a continuity where one can have a station of greater spontaneity and freedom of consciousness, more inclusive working out. But in the ascent of consciousness, as we approach, in degrees, this becomes more and more spontaneous and free. It is for this reason that it is said in the ancient books, the man who has arrived at self-possession attains spontaneously without the need of concentration in thought and effort, the knowledge or the result which the idea or the will in him moves out to embrace. So, one who has attained to that consciousness, he wants to attain a knowledge or he wants to exercise will. In both cases, it will be spontaneous, the result is attained, and there is no need of a concentrated, separately concentrated effort. There is only this one intention unfolding. Such is the nature of our life journey from the poise of the soul. Not just the psychic being, but from the station of the presiding consciousness of the self, which presides even over the journey of the psychic being. From a certain perspective, you can see it this way. The one divine consciousness, as if like a single flame, bursting out in infinite sparks. Different facets of world experience, life experience that it wants to have. From a position which is itself outside space and time, bursting out in infinite directions into space-time. That's the status of the self presiding over your life journey. That's the central being. The same oneself taking now many different facets and aspects of journey and life experience, still outside space-time, and leans into space-time, presiding over the journey as it unfolds in space and time. So now this one movement presides over the whole journey of your psychic being across lives. It holds the purpose of that experience and its eventual fulfillment already in that station. And so each life as it unfolds, with full freedom of variations, it is still held in the purpose and the eventual direction. And therefore we say the destiny is the free choice of the self. And whatever we may do in between, we will eventually get to that in the larger scheme of things. When and how is the free play of the soul. But the destiny itself is the free choice of this presiding consciousness. And in the actual journey of the psychic being, in a single life, there is still this presiding movement supporting the larger goal and purpose. And there will be lives where you will focus, the psychic being will focus on developing this aspect and the other aspect and completely opposite facets of experience, but still this general sense of direction and purpose will be held. And we can come back to an awareness of this by leaning back, resting in the psychic being, and from the psychic being leaning back to rest in the self. We can have the sense of purpose of our life, our lives, our direction of evolution and purpose. And when seen in this way, one has even a sense of where we will go after and after, in a general sense, because the forms are not fixed in any case. But from that poise, everything is unfolding spontaneously, smoothly, freely. And there is never, ever any sense of danger or fear or possibility of loss. Everything is included in the play. Nothing is ever wasted. The soul which has risen to the divine samadhi, and samadhi in the true sense and the larger sense which we have seen, immersion in the oneness, participates in the measure of its attainment in this reversed condition of things. The true condition for that which is the reverse of our mentality is the truth. It is for this reason that, as is said in the ancient books, the man who has arrived at self-possession attains spontaneously, without the need of concentration in thought and effort, the knowledge or the result which the idea or the will in him moves out to embrace. An idea or a will, but capital I, capital W, not a personal will of concentration of thought and effort, but an awareness turned in this way. And that's why I give you this picture. The one self turning in awareness is the basis for the whole of our life's journey of our individual personality across lives, and spontaneously, freely, effortlessly. To arrive then at this settled divine status must be the object of our concentration. Now we're still in a consciousness which needs concentration. But our concentration should be aimed now to arrive at this status where we will not need concentration anymore. So this is the rest of the description, the next 3 paragraphs of this chapter. How to arrive at this, and what is the nature of the concentration that we have to practice. Sri Aurobindo discusses 3 kinds of concentration or meditation practice here that are specific to this approach of the yoga of integral knowledge in the larger context of the integral yoga. There are other letters or separate portions here which discuss the approach through the heart. But since the theme here is the integral knowledge, it is through the mind's concentration that this is taken up. And in the 3, the third is the best for the integral yoga. In a sense, it is also the easiest for the integral yoga because most encompassing, most complete in a single movement. But the first 2 help to train the power of concentration, help to develop the capacity for realizing the third most easily. And so in our own practice, it is useful to take up the first 2 methods. If nothing else, simply as an exercise for training our capacity. But eventually, having done the first 2, we settle into the third approach, which is the most relaxed, so to say, in which the concentration is most multifaceted or complete, and through which, of course, the most rich experience and realization is attained. So he begins now the first description. The first step in concentration must be always to accustom the discursive mind to a settled, unwavering pursuit of a single course of connected thought on a single subject. And this it must do undistracted by all lures and alien calls on its attention. I skip now the next paragraph. The second approach, he says, the whole mind is concentrated on the essence of the idea only, so as not only to reach the thought knowledge or psychological experience of the subject, but the very essence of the thing behind the idea. And then I skip again. The third process is neither at first to concentrate on a strenuous meditation on the one subject, nor in strenuous contemplation of the one object of thought vision, but first to still the mind altogether, and then the rest which he discusses, which has to be done. So you see now the 3 starting points. In the first case, we are accustoming the mind and then taking a single focus of thought. In the second case, we go behind the idea. And in the third case, we silence the mind. At starting points. We're not looking at the full process yet. You'll notice there's a natural sequence. In the first case, you're training the mind to be able to hold attention and disengage from the things which distract. Bring the state of mind itself to one-pointedness, even if it is on an idea. In the second case, you're training the mind to go beyond mental thought to something which is behind the essence of the thing itself of which the thought or the idea is a form. So you're breaking through, cutting across to something beyond mind. In the third case, you're silencing the mind so that that thing which is beyond can enter and settle into it and then lead you to the thing which is required, the most complete of the experiences. If you look at these 3 in sequence, you see how each prepares for the next. And therefore, when Sri Aurobindo gives you a sequence of possibilities, we don't see, oh, let's go to the third because that is the best. You cannot do the third easily if you have not attained to the second, which teaches you to open to that which is beyond the mind. And you cannot do the second if you have not first developed the capacity to focus your attention to be able to cut through from mind to beyond mind. So we will take it more as a sequence of practice. You may even, as an exercise, practice the first and then the second and then the third in one sitting. And there will still be a continuity to it. Or we may spend a few weeks practicing the first until it is stable enough. Then we spend a few weeks practicing the second until that becomes easy. And then we move to the third, whichever works, or maybe a mix of both. So we look at the first now. The first step in concentration must be always. Now, the always is suggestive here. Any training of mind will begin with this. Accustom the discursive mind to settle unwavering, to a settled unwavering pursuit of a single course. So the mind which is so used to wandering, catch somebody, what were you thinking of? And the fact that you have interrupted the thought with your question is enough for him to forget what he was thinking of. And he will say, I don't know. Because it was such a superficial wandering mind, even the thoughts were not distinctly formed, that he has nothing even to grasp, much less the memory of it to remain. If a mind is more developed, the person will pause, momentarily confused, turn in and pick up the line of thought which was going on. But then if he is conscious enough and he looks back at the chain which brought him to that thought, it is completely aimless wandering. One suggestion, one association leading to another, until eventually we started with something here and you are now thinking of something totally different, which would have slipped within another 5 seconds into something completely different. And the mind is habituated to be in this discursive state for how many decades of our life? How many seconds of the day are we in a state of concentration? All right, we are all supposed to be in some sadhana. So I will ask, how many minutes in the day are we in a state of concentration? And you can count the number of minutes. Even for a half an hour meditation that we have, listening to music, for example, you will find the mind wandering. It can't even hold attention on the music or the experience for more than a few minutes at a time. And you find yourself coming back again and again from the wandered state. So the first step is always accustom. The key word here is it's a habit. Because we have this habit of wandering, we end up doing it. The substance of the mind, the chitta, must be trained now to have a new habit, to hold attention, to stay on track of whatever it chooses to. Doesn't matter what. It can be a mind which is now daydreaming, but the daydream itself will be on track, freely chosen, and then stay on the track. And that it becomes a habit. It's just another habit, no problem. But it's a useful habit, whereas the wandering is not useful. So accustom the discursive mind to a settled, unwavering pursuit of a single course of connected thought on a single subject. And this it must do undistracted by all lures and alien calls on its attention. So as you are going on this single chain from this thought to the next, on a single topic you have chosen, things pop up from the side, pulling you, oh, this leads to that, and you're always tempted to wander off, and you refuse. Or if something comes which is relevant, you use that in the larger context of the subject you've chosen. You do not lose sight of the subject at any point. Sri Aurobindo says, such concentration is common enough in our ordinary life, but it becomes more difficult when we have to do it inwardly without any outward object or action on which to keep the mind. So when is it common actually in our life? When there is an external object. I am riding a horse. If I start daydreaming, I will get thrown off. So I am forced to keep my attention on the horse, on where it is going, on the reins, on the stirrups, and on the branch of the tree which is about to bang on my head, so I have to duck. There is a continuous focus of attention, although involving many different facets. And the cost of wandering mind is, of course, quite severe. So you're forced to hold attention. So he says it's common enough, but it's common enough in situations like this, when something demands it from you, when the cost of loss is too great, and when there is a specific external focus which is hitting you in the face all the time. You are sitting at a computer screen, you have to write a letter. Well, you're forced to do that. And still at that moment, something pops up from your Facebook account, bleep, so-and-so has signed in, so-and-so has sent you a message, and you're tempted to turn and look and click on that and see the message, and you struggle internally. Can that wait? Or this is going to be interesting. I've been waiting for a message from this person for a long time. This is going to be interesting. And I overcome the temptation and bring my mind back on the focus. But you notice the nature of the temptation, even as I am writing, something still continues to pull me. These are threads which are pulling at our energies, because our mind is still entangled with the emotions and the life energies. When the life energy is restless, the mind tends to be restless. If you have just been in an exciting activity, let's say, where you were with a group of people shouting on a football match, and you come back and then try to write something with clarity, your mind is unable to become clear because the energies are still like this, shaking. You have to bring yourself to stillness before the thoughts can get a clarity of form and development and structure. If you don't, what you write is also agitated without clarity of development of thought. When you're used to being in the state of clarity of mind where energies are quiet, you will not find that activity of shouting and screaming to be very comfortable, because the state of agitation is no more comfortable. So it's part of the training for the person of knowledge to learn to bring stillness in the emotions. And that's whole part of the whole training for purification of the mind of the previous chapter, which we have seen. And the three kinds of purification that are necessary. But in all of them, the key point was still stilling. Now what is interesting is, Sri Aurobindo catches essential principles going back across everything. He gives you the big picture of how the whole machinery, for lack of a better word, interdependence of different parts of our nature in this yoga are held. But then he looks at one thing behind it all which holds everything. You do that and you get all these results. Stilling the mind. You notice the third practice of concentration is going to be silencing the mind completely. But if that same kind of silence is brought into the life energies, you also have the benefit of the purification, which was discussed in the previous chapter. Purity, concentration being twin powers which lead us to this experience and realization of the self, both are easily attained when we bring the principle of silencing the mind, silencing the life energies. And if you can bring peace into the whole being, mind, life energies, and body, everything is held in that peace, the purification, as well as the concentration, both are enormously amplified and developed together. I'm kind of anticipating, but this is because Sri Aurobindo himself does not tell you why he brings this in as explicit terms. It's only after many, many, many chapters, when you go to the yoga of self-perfection, there he will speak of the establishment of the equality for purification, and then first purification, then equality. And briefly mention how this takes care of this. And all those points are discussed here extensively in different chapters. It's like here he develops each of these themes, and in the final formulation of the practice of the integral yoga, he gives the 6 limbs of the yoga, which handle all these things in large chunks, spanning all these different efforts on different parts of the being in a single exercise. But If you read only that without understanding all the complexity and nuances, you may exercise only a part of your being, not recognizing how important it is to include the whole of the being in that exercise. But he takes care to mention that, as you will see in the third process when he speaks of this. He speaks of how this must come eventually in all the parts of the being. But it's useful for us to see the big picture every now and then as we continue with this text. So accustom the discursive mind to a settled, unwavering pursuit, undistracted by all the lures and alien calls on its attention. In the computer screen, the lures and alien calls are explicit, objective. Something pops up. You have a choice to point and click on it. And so it's easier to prevent yourself from being distracted. You can hold your focus, the pull may come, but when the same thing is done internally, I'm no more looking at a computer screen. I must now hold my thoughts on a single idea. Now when the lures and alien calls come, my mind is sucked in. I am not conscious even that there is this pull which is drawing me because I'm not sufficiently disengaged from the whole machinery of mind. A thought pops in. I am swept, overwhelmed by it. It is me. It's not separate from me. So this internal focus is far more difficult than the external focus. But the external focus is a good starting point. That's why I say such concentration is common enough in our ordinary life. But it becomes more difficult when we have to do it inwardly, without any outward object or action on which to keep the mind. So at first, one may use devices, external tools which help us bring back our focus. It's easy to do with these little, most phones will now have a timer. You set your timer for a 1 minute beeper. So every minute it goes beep. And immediately that it goes beep, you realize, oh, my mind has wandered. I bring it back to focus. And I hold the focus. After a while, beep. I realize I've gone out of focus. I come back. So an external beep is useful to help the mind come back. Yet, this inward concentration is what the seeker of knowledge must effect. There's a footnote here. In the elementary stages of internal debate and judgment, vitarka and vichara, for the correction of false ideas and arrivals at the intellectual truth. So this inward concentration you must effect. And he makes it a point that this inward concentration is for what? He said, sequence of thought, single course of connected thought on single subject. So where do you arrive at that? At an elementary stage of internal debate, judgment, discussion, thought, and you hold your attention on where you have to get to logically in the sequence. All that is fine. But this is what we have to come to at a preliminary stage. But the same power you will use later for a more advanced application. Nor must it be merely the consecutive thought of the intellectual thinker, whose object is to conceive and intellectually link together his conceptions. So this is what we would have done normally if someone said, okay, sit down and think about this subject. Okay, what's the subject? Take up a topic which is bothering you at present. Preferably something which is not directly of your personal involvement. If it is about your current conflict which you are having with X or Y person or situation, there will be too much passion mixed in. So you take something very objective, and what people generally do, the current, some political conflict or some situation in the world, or take something more impersonal as the environmental degeneration. And then your mind follows in thought, what are all the different aspects of this? What are all the different things we can do? And all that is a useful exercise, but that's not either what we are required to do. Although that would be good training for the mind. It is not, except perhaps at first, a process of reasoning that is wanted, so much as a dwelling, so far as possible, on the fruitful essence of the idea, which by the insistence of the soul's will upon it must yield up all the facets of its truth. So, except at first, you might have a process of reasoning. Why is the environment degenerating? Because we are busy looking at short-term profits. Because everything is measured in terms of my benefit rather than the collective benefit. Because we have ceased to look upon the earth and nature as part of ourselves or ourselves as part of her. We have cut ourselves off from her. Because, and so on, you will go through logically looking at each of these and then look at each of the reasons for each of these. Good, useful, it'll make for a nice, interesting essay. But the focus here is going to be to go deeper. Dwell as much as far as possible on the fruitful essence of the idea. What's at the heart of it all? And which by the insistence of the soul's will upon it must yield up all the facets of its truth. And so when you dwell upon it, all these facets will appear. Yes, all these are equally important. But at the heart of it is something where we are out of sync with the oneness of the earth, with the journey of the earth and her purpose, and a larger picture forms and emerges, and you feel we have cut ourselves off from this deeper, truer reality. Now already at that point you're feeling something. It's no more a thinking. You're perceiving something, not specifically as a chain of thought. There's an awareness developing which is almost experiential. And in that awareness, the different facets of the truth will begin to gradually open up. So this is an exercise where you see, at first you may use thought, but as quickly as possible stop thinking, rather hold in awareness the theme and try to hold the essence of it, get to the essence, deeper and deeper essence of it. Thoughts will come, insights, ideas, observe them, remain aware of them, and wait until more and more comes. So you will notice there is a status where your awareness is like remains equal. When a thought comes, you don't get sucked into it. You acknowledge, you recognize, and then wait for more, something deeper. And it's as if you're going to something deeper each time. Something deeper unfolds, something deeper emerges. And the nature of what is known and held is less and less of an intellectual thought form, more and more of an idea, concept, experience form. It becomes naturally more intuitive in what is being felt and experienced. All the facets and thought forms do emerge from it. Thus, and now he gives a theme, thus, if it be the divine love that is the subject of concentration, it is on the essence of the idea of God as love. Remember, our goal is eventually to get to that, the one, the essence, the source. And so, environment is good, interesting as an exercise, but it's not going to take us by itself to that, unless we use that consciously as a means for something deeper, the oneness behind even of the environment as the divine manifestation. The divine as manifestation in nature. So you go to that theme eventually. So here the divine love. It is on the essence of the idea of God as love that the mind should concentrate in such a way that the various manifestation of the divine love should arise luminously, not only to the heart, not only to the thought, but in the heart and being and vision of the sadhaka. Now you will recall all these four words, thought, heart, being and vision. We have discussed earlier, a couple of chapters before, when Sri Aurobindo was discussing what is meant by attaining to knowledge of the divine. And we saw that it was not just informational knowledge, It was not only an intellectual understanding, it was not only a heart feeling, it was not just the whole being experiencing an identity, but it was all these, but at a level which is not in the consciousness of pieces, but a vision of the thing itself, where you see and experience in identity the thing in all the parts of your being. And the fact that he mentions all these 4 keywords here is a suggestion to remind us of that. That's the nature of the experience we are going towards. So the phrase he has used for the theme, essence of the idea of God as love. First, we dwell on the theme of love, capital L. It's not human or romantic love. It's not emotional affection of love. It is something deeper. God as love. So again, the concept of God, we're not seeing a person sitting on a throne. We're not seeing this disembodied being outside formlessly, separate from the universe. We see the one being who is all things and who manifests as the universe and yet presides from outside. And from that oneness, he leans to the whole universe, which is himself, and embraces and draws it all into himself. And this movement of drawing the whole thing to himself is that love. It is also the movement with which he bursts out in delight to manifest the universe, holds the universe in his delight and love, and with his love draws everything back to himself. But from that poise of freedom, beyond space, beyond time, pouring into space and time, and in each and every atom and fragment of particle, it is filled with his consciousness, which he draws towards himself. And the whole evolution is nothing but the universe being drawn to him by his love. God as love, pouring to fill everything, but also drawing everything to himself. And the idea of God as love. And then the essence of the idea of God as love. Whatever we may have used as a picture or as a description was a starting point, and we must get to the essence of that, which means what? Feel what it feels, dwell on the sense of it until it begins to draw a response in your whole being. Your mind holds this, your heart is immersed in this, your whole being identifies with it, and the whole thing takes place in a kind of an inner vision. You see, but not as a picture, but you hold in that picture, in that seeing, an experience. It is on the essence of the idea of God as love that the mind should concentrate, in such a way that the various manifestation of the divine love should arise luminously, not only to the thought, but in the heart and being and vision of the sadhaka. So the various manifestation of the divine love. And so as we dwell on it, spontaneously an aspect comes up, the divine pouring himself in everything. And when he pours himself into his manifestation, whether it is this huge galaxy or this tiny grain of sand or this little me, it's the same thing. He pours as much of himself into a whole galaxy as he pours into me. I have the whole of him. All of him pours himself into me with his love. I only don't bother to look up. I don't bother to receive. I'm not aware of it because I didn't even try to be aware of it. And not just to me, to each person. It is the same, all of him that he pours himself. And to all of us as a group, as a whole, and to all of us as a humanity, and to all of us as all the conscient beings in the whole universe. And all these are different facets of that experience. And then something emerges in my heart, a kind of a gratitude and a love towards the divine. And I realize even that love from my heart is his love, which he filled into me, which rises now in my heart as mine and goes back into him, because there is no other than him. And in each one, and in each thing, and everything is as if drawn together in this thread of his pouring love. Threads, infinite threads of pouring love. And so one dwells on it, and very quickly it moves to a kind of an immersion in experience, and one remains on that. It is a one point, one focus, one purpose, one theme, and yet it is multifaceted in the extent to which it includes our whole being. The thought may come first and the experience afterwards. But equally, the experience may come first and the knowledge arise out of the experience, whichever happens. If you started with thought, there are days when you are less open in the heart. And so it starts with thought dwelling in this way. But very quickly, one consciously brings in the whole of the being and the experience fills in. There will be other days when right from the beginning, as you turn to this theme, the experience fills you and there's this pouring love and gratitude from your heart. And then out of that experience, the different facets come and you remain immersed in it. And what is interesting is in this, you may allow yourself to wander. This facet, that form, that relationship. And then something comes up which you had read, some incident from history, something comes up, but remains always dwelling on this overall theme. And suddenly you say, oh, now I understand better that thing which I had read long ago, which I had completely forgotten. And now suddenly it has a vivid meaning. And things will come up like this spontaneous, but we remain in the overall experience of the theme. Afterwards, the thing attained has to be dwelt on and more held till it becomes a constant experience. And finally, the dharma or law of the being. So you dwell on it more and more, not just for those 10 minutes in the morning or 5 minutes in the evening or half an hour or whatever it is. But afterwards, when you come out from that concentration, meditation, you try to remain immersed in that feeling and that perception as you begin your day activity. And perhaps now with eyes open, you consciously try to hold that awareness. All this is filled with the pouring divine love, which pours into everything and rises back to the divine in this constant flow. And the divine is in all things, and your love for him turns to all things, or the divine in all things. And afterwards I am lost in my activity. But for a brief while when I pause, I return to this idea or this vision or experience, and then again continue my work, and frequent breaks, reconnections. The mother said, for this purpose, it is more useful to have many frequent contacts in the day than one long 1 hour or 2 hour meditation, and after which everything is lost as you enter your normal routine or normal state. Because the goal is to bring this into a state of constancy. So dwelt on and more held. This idea of holding the state is extremely important. You will notice there are activities in which what you are holding, which is felt almost like an energy that you hold, an experience that you tangibly feel that you hold in your aura. There are activities in which you feel this dispersing. You start gossiping, you start criticizing somebody, and you can feel the energy thinning, fading out, losing. Suddenly, half an hour later, you feel depleted, you feel empty, hollow. And you must come back, regather, recenter, rebuild. And you observe there are things which deplete, there are things which strengthen. Certain company, certain people, certain activities, certain places, certain thoughts, certain feelings, certain actions. Just observe in the beginning. And later you will choose. And you will also learn to retain, even if you're in the midst of a gossip session, you may choose to disengage from it energetically and hold your experience and not participate. Even if you're required socially, you may smile and nod, but not engage energetically. And if you are able to hold that energy and perhaps even fill the energy into that space, you will find very quickly the discussion itself changes quality. And so in this way one builds, gathers and builds. dwelt on, more and more held, till it becomes a constant experience. And this is the nature of the tapas, the gathering in concentration and building, densifying, intensifying until it becomes almost tangible and permeates even the physical substance of your body. Not just your aura, not just your mind, not just your emotions, but even the tissue of your body. With eyes full open, with your consciousness fully connected to the material world experience, you feel it tangibly. Not just around you in your aura, but you perceive it in the whole universe. That's when it becomes permanent. Sri Aurobindo gives this clue. You must eventually become aware of it permeating the whole universe with eyes open. Then it becomes permanent. Till it becomes a constant experience, and finally the dharma or law of the being. Because when you start referring now to circumstances and the effect they have on the experience, and you refer to them in terms of this experience, very quickly your life priorities change. And everything is now seen in terms of this truth and valued in terms of this truth. And this is the law by which everything is valued and decided. This is the process of concentrated meditation. So meditation here is not pure concentration. It is a dwelling on a theme. The pure concentration will hold a state of experience or awareness, not this dwelling on. So this is a meditation, but a concentrated meditation. You held a purpose and an object and grew to an experience. But now we come to the second. But a more strenuous method is the fixing of the whole mind in concentration on the essence of the idea only, so as to reach not the thought knowledge or the psychological experience of the subject, but the very essence of the thing behind the idea. In this process, thought ceases and passes into the absorbed or ecstatic contemplation of the object, or by merging into it in an inner samadhi. These are all degrees of that concentrating on the essence. If this be the process followed, then subsequently the state into which we rise must still be called down to take possession of the lower being, to shed its light, power and bliss on our ordinary consciousness. For otherwise we may possess it, as many do, in the elevated condition or in the inward samadhi, but we shall lose our hold of it when we awake or descend into the contacts of the world. And this truncated possession is not the aim of an integral yoga. Now you see, in the first exercise, we begin with where we are and then grow into something which is more and more an essential experience, filling the whole being. In the second case, we aim directly into the essence, but then we acquire it much more profoundly. And then, though, we must make the effort to bring it down and spread it and establish it into all the parts of our being. And so the emergence from the state of inward contemplation or samadhi, to whatever degree, the emergence from it becomes critical. And the emergence should be made as slow as possible, at each point linking that experience into the parts of our awareness that are returning. So when we are in a certain deep state of concentration, I will not use the word samadhi yet, but samadhi-like, where we have disengaged, disconnected from the surface world experience, partly or completely. As we return, it's as if we become aware in layers, until eventually at the last stage we begin to feel the body, sensations, and then the things around. But at each layer, as it comes into our awareness, this experience must now be imprinted into it and held. And then another layer, imprint and hold, until eventually you come out into full body awareness, full sensory awareness of the world, and imprint and hold. But you stay quiet, not move too much. Because like when you wake up from sleep, from a deep state of sleep, the moment the body moves, you lose the thread of the dream memory or experience. So similarly, if you've gone very deep, there is a point of link which is still very thin, and you wait. Wait until it settles, wait until the link itself over time broadens, and then slowly enter into movement, maintaining that status in movement. So initially these experiences will be easier to hold in a static state because you had them in a static state, where all your active parts are still. But the moment you start moving the body, you will lose it. The moment you have a strong emotion, you'll lose it. The moment you have a strong thought and you focus attention of thinking on something, you lose it. But you become quiet, you disengage, focus inside, and you find it is still there. But you must eventually get it into the dynamic parts. That's the phrase Sri Aurobindo uses. In the midst of the physical movement, emotional expression, and thoughts. It must permeate all these. So that process is long. But it's only when that process is complete that you have this experience as a realization constantly in all things. Raman Maharshi describes how he attained to self-realization by a sustained concentration in 3 days. But it took him 10 years to establish that as the permanent state in all activities of life. And this process of establishing in all activities of life is critical. Otherwise, I have self-realization in my deep concentration, I come out and then I'm the same cantankerous person. And nothing has really changed. Sri Aurobindo has an interesting sonnet on this theme, which goes something like this. He said, I am egoless, spiritual, free. Then swore because his dinner was not ready. I asked him why. He said, it is not me, but the belly's hungry god that gets unsteady. So it goes on like this. I don't remember the rest of it. But that's the problem when somewhere inside I hold that state, but the rest of me is still what it was. So this imprinting layer by layer and then holding, staying in that state in stillness until it stabilizes in full surface awareness and then slowly extending it into the activities. All of this becomes necessary. He uses this word, take possession of the lower being. So you have a consciousness and it kind of grips each layer of the lower being as you come in to out and up to down. Each layer must enter it and grip it and hold it as its own. Make it its own. To shed its light, power and bliss, that radiance fills in. You can't always grip all the parts of your being. You're not aware of your body consciousness or your emotions mostly, or large parts of it at least. So there where you cannot grip, the light, the glow of that experience has to fill, suffuse, immerse, spread. And that prepares those parts to become more responsive, more open, until eventually they become conscious enough that you can grip and integrate into the experience. Or otherwise, he says, we may possess as many do. This is relatively common for those who follow intense tapas. We may possess it as many do in the elevated condition or in the inward samadhi, but we shall lose our hold on it when we awake or descend into the contacts of the world. This he calls truncated possession. We possess it in a part somewhere and then it is cut off. And that's not the aim of integral yoga. But before this part, he discusses how to get to that. And that is extremely important. A more strenuous method. It's strenuous because it requires a much more intense kind of concentration where you are pulling or you are entering a state of a kind of abstraction. See, as long as you are in the domain of thought, thinking, or idea, experience, it's tangible. You're familiar with this because it's still in the domain of form. But as you focus in exclusion on the pure essence, form fades. And what are you experiencing? You're holding something which is in pure essence formless. Even it becomes after some time timeless. How do you hold it? What do you feel? So there's a kind of an intense concentration to get to that. But once you're able to do that, it is enormously rewarding, because as a result, you become more conscious on this level above mind. And later, you will find when intuitions come, you're able to grasp them on the level before they enter the domain of form of thought. And you can know them in essence, and then you can draw out far more, because you hold the seed from which the whole plant flows out. So, a more strenuous method is the fixing of the whole mind in concentration on the essence of the idea only. So there are two key things here. Whole mind, not just a part of mind. If you hold a part of your mind, the rest of the mind is pulling you out or drawing you with its thoughts, with its suggestions, and there's a whole struggle. The whole mind must be drawn together, and you will see the value of the earlier discussion where Sri Aurobindo describes the stages of the Raja Yoga, where bit by bit everything is to be drawn into that single focus. And this part of the withdrawing attention from everywhere else is what allows the full mind to enter in one movement on what we do. So fixing the whole mind in concentration on the essence of the idea. So we took here the idea of God as love. And now we dwell more and more on the pure sense of God as love. No more imaging, no more this facet and that facet. We just go into the essence of what is it really, truly. And we lose ourselves into that. So as to reach not the thought or knowledge or the psychological experience of the subject, but the very essence of the thing behind the idea. So God as love is still idea, and as you dwell in it, there is a kind of an essential, pure love, and the whole of God is this pure, glowing, essential love, formless, no relationships, nothing else, just pure love. And you dwell more and more into that pure, essential love. That is God, nothing else. Nothing else exists, there is only that. In this process, thought ceases and passes. Instead, you enter the absorbed or ecstatic contemplation of the object, or by emerging into it in an inner samadhi. What's the difference? Ecstatic contemplation, there is this pure love, no form, no God, nothing. This is God, this is oneness, this is the all, pure love. You are in relation to this pure love experience. It fills you with its light, glow, delight, whatever. But this is all. But you are separate in a sense. You are close to it. And then last step, you lose yourself in it. And at that point is the samadhi, immersion, absorbed in an inner samadhi. There is only love. There is no you separate. There is only love. There is no universe. There is only this pure, essential one love. And then you remain in that. As you can see, there is no thought. No sense of experience as felt in the mind, heart, being, vision. There is only one pure, essential, formless identity. Pure awareness of love. That's it. And you stay in that. And generally, when you're immersed in this way, there's no sense of time or space or anything. You just remain. So the return always involves a kind of a falling back into sense of time-space, bit by bit, or initially there's a sudden drop and then a gradual emergence. Or later you'll find you can actually gently, slowly emerge from it to turn to the whole world and hold still this. A part of you immersed, and then another part of you as if turning to face the world. And then very gently, slowly engage with the world, while still holding the pure essence of this experience. If we can, this is the direction in which we must move gradually. And then bit by bit, you can see how the light of it can fill the rest of the being and join and take up the being into their experience. But at this point, habituating yourself to remain in this thoughtless condition at a level which is essential above even thought form and thought idea, thought knowledge, is the link from there to pure intuition and the ranges beyond. And so that passage is now created. And then comes the third process, which is to still the mind, and you may use various methods, he says, but then after that, there is a great calm which settles on the being. There comes usually with it the perception and experience of the all-pervading silent Brahman. Everything else at first seeming to be mere form. And then from here, you can see how in this state you're aware, but there's no special focus of concentration on one thing or state. You just hold this state and become aware of the presence of the silence, the Brahman in all things, filling, supporting, surrounding, presiding over, transcending, and just this awareness. And when you have this kind of awareness, you can be looking around at all things, and all forms look somehow empty, hollow. There's only that thing which fills everything. And you can be in the midst of activity as long as the mind is not too immersed, lost in the activity or thought process. You can hold this state as you walk around. And this is the practice Sri Aurobindo was doing in Alipur jail, dwelling on the keyword from the Upanishad, from the Veda. All this is Brahman, Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahman, dwelling on that phrase and then on the experience. And he says at that point, even his concentration was not very developed. When it is really developed, then this becomes much more deep, much more dense, concentrated. Ghana is the word. Dense in as if substantiality. This whole thing is so densely Brahman that even the material substance feels like foam on the surface of the density of the ocean of the Brahman presence. And that's the kind of depth which is easily accessible if you have done the second exercise of getting into that state in the pure formless essence of that experience. And if that is now easily done, then this third process now becomes very quickly deepened. And what we do with the process and how we come to this silencing of the mind is the theme of this paragraph and the conclusion in the next, which we will take up next Friday. What we may do after this part of the study is to immediately take it up while still the study is fresh, while still we have the feel of the experience, to take it up as a practice. And perhaps immediately after this, one may choose to sit quietly if you want to go to the ashram, or just sit quietly and allow that experience to settle, or enter this, the first practice, or through it the second. See how far you can go into it, and then repeat for a few days. And there's a certain momentum, a certain build-up, because we have chosen with this intention. And we are helped because of Sri Aurobindo's presence leading us into this. We ask for his help when we begin. We thank him for his Shakti, the Divine Mother. And throughout the process itself, we may dwell on their presence, if that becomes the natural way in which we feel more easily. And we will use this as a theme for practice for the next few days. And the third process we will take up next Friday. I do not know if we should take up any questions at all, if that distracts from this. But if there's a question relating to the theme, we may still look at it. Oh.